Okay, we're back. I'm Anthony. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Future Proof podcast by CoAI. I'm joined with Francesca. We missed you last week, Francesca, and joined with Shane. It's May 31st, and it's the middle of the day. I think we're all in California. Is that right?
Yep.
That's right. So this episode, we've been chatting about the concept of AI agents, also known as Agentic AI, also sometimes referred to as autonomous agents. And we thought it was a good time to for us to dive in. We're not going to go down in the details of how to program one of these AI agents, but it's more like talking about what is an AI agent and what is an Agentic AI. We think it's important, and we're going to in this podcast hopefully learn from our co-hosts new things as we discuss, and hopefully you guys can follow along. And when we post this, you can always reach out to us and ask questions in the comments, and we will respond. We want to hear from you. So that said, I'm going to give it a first shot on what Agentic AI is, and then I'm going to pass it on to Francesca and Shane to kind of add or subtract from my vision of it or definition of it. So right now, the way I'm describing Agentic AI is at the center of it. Of course, you have an LLM engine or model running, and you're not going to interact with it directly. The Agentic AI is going to be goal driven or mission driven. So you want to give it you give the agent a goal or a mission, and it can autonomously run that mission or task until it's complete or till it actually feels like it has no way to solve the mission. And so behind that scenes is going to be the ability for that agent to kind of interact with tools that it has available to itself. It's going to be able to generate its own reasoning and planning to try to complete its mission. And it will actually have the ability to be multimodal. So it might be able to visualize, see images or produce images. It could listen to audio. It could produce audio. And if need be, if part of its mission is to actually do something technical, it could write code and execute that code and try to accomplish the mission. And so I think that's currently my idea of when I hear Agentic AI or agent AI or agents. So you guys grade me, Francesca or Shane, jump in. Is that a good enough definition, or is it on my way out in the weeds?
I mean, I think it was a pretty solid rundown. Like, one thing I would add is the importance of memory to all of this, right? So one of the ways in which I distinguish just a regular large language model, which, as we've talked about many times, is really just a token or word predictor. You've now got this notion of what they say in engineering parlance, a state, right? So it can remember what it's done in the past, which I think is really important to things like personalization, for one, but also being able to learn along the way and iterate and refine the different actions it's taking, which current models just don't do.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Shane, because for me, the way I think about most things in the AI space, particularly when something new or exciting comes up, is trying to define it in the context of how does that compare to what we are using now, what we are relying on now, and what might that mean for both the user and sort of the tasks and the applications of AI, in this case, sort of autonomous AI or AI agents. And right now, if I think about sort of the workflow that majority of the people have, myself included, with large language models like Claude, like ChatGPT, it's very much this like human user-driven prompting workflow, or I just give I have to come in basically knowing what it is I want, but also knowing what it is I want the LLM to do. Like, I go in and I say, hey, give me this, I get the output. Okay, now that I've read that output, I go, okay, now give me this, and I get that output. And I'm still like doing a lot of that work. I'm in the driver's seat. I'm giving this GPT, I'm these like guardrails or these very specific instructions or this very specific setup so that I can eventually get the output I want. And that has been very effective for many people. And we've talked at length in the past about how that could be way more useful than whatever it is people were doing before that. But now that we look towards what AI agents could be doing, it's basically telling us like, hey, there may be a case in the near future where you do not have to have this kind of interaction with your ChatGPT or any of the other LLMs. Like, you don't have to handhold it through the problem you're trying to work out. You can actually give it this higher level objective, and it will have the capacity to have this memory, as Shane was saying. It will have sort of the tools to make this objective possible, to realize this objective. It will have the sort of thinking, quote unquote, thinking capabilities of iteration, collaboration, reflection. And it's just like a new way of really thinking about the interaction you'll have with an AI, where maybe right now you're doing this very prompt and response, something that to me feels very rigid right now, to interacting with an AI agent that is a bit more self-driven by the agent, that it is higher level for you, where you're thinking about maybe the objective and handing that over, and that the agent can go through this quote unquote thinking and reflective process alongside you versus just trying to receive that one-way instruction through your prompts.
Yeah, I think that's what's got everyone so excited about agents, right? Because as you were pointing out, the current version of these models, as groundbreaking as they really are, you really do have to babysit them, right? Like, it's a very immediate exchange, right? You insert a prompt, you get back a response. Oftentimes you've got to keep going back and forth to get the response that you want, but you have to be present for that workflow. And the promise of agents is being able to decrease the time between, your interactions with it, because you can just assign not just a task, but an entire workflow to it, and it'll go out and execute a series of steps. And that's really the distinction here for me. It's not just one little thing. It's a series of subtasks, that comprise a much more complex workflow. And that may take 30 minutes. It may take several days, right?
Right.
But the promise of the agent is that it can go out and spend that time, whether it's an hour or a week, and execute that series of tasks and then come back when it's done. And none of the models that we currently have do this, but there are a lot of really thoughtful startups, and certainly the big guys, the Googles and the, even the Anthropics of the world, that are all working towards this goal.
Right. And I like that framing of it, because it really orients us towards like the bigger picture of AI, and what, these players like Google and Anthropic and OpenAI are trying to achieve. Like, they're not trying to achieve sort of this tool, which is currently ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, that has this, interaction with the human. Like, they're trying to achieve this like broader type of general intelligence, right? And agents, I think, are a very logical step towards that, where if we think about how humans operate right now in the workplace, in our social lives, in our family lives, in our personal lives with our hobbies, how we're developing interests and, kind of going off and doing our own thing, like, you're not really having that interaction the way you're having that interaction with ChatGPT right now, right? Like, that's not how you're talking to your coworker. You're not like sitting over your coworker's shoulder and going like, now add this function and now add this function, and then tell me ideas for future functions. Like, you're telling your colleague like, hey, I need to work on a marketing campaign that targets young adults for the upcoming summer holiday. Like, give me something by the end of this week, And that's very close to the kind of workflow that we imagine these AI agents would be able to deal with.
Yeah.
I think that I feel like the why does this matter and why do we care about it is kind of what you kind of just outlined. It's like having a conversation in chat is very sort of like you're present and you're driving it. Tomorrow, whenever that might be, you may be interacting with an AI agent that could be as similar to what a human was doing. Like, right? Like you might be talking to a marketing manager and saying, "Hey, can you get all this done? Here's some goals that we have. I'll do a check-in with you in 2 weeks. And if you have any questions, hit me in Slack." Well, that marketing manager might become an AI agent. And that's the big deal. That's where people should be like, whoa, that's where software impacts labor market really hard, when agents can do thinking, memory, strategy, tasks. It could see, hear, talk, and it has tools. That's where we're heading. I mean, I don't think our, for listeners that are like following along and they're curious about AI and they're seemingly trying to think about it, how to use it and work. The Chat GPT interface, what Francesca said, the prompt and response, that is absolutely the worst state it's ever going to be in. Like, computing used to be a DOS prompt and a Unix prompt. Now we're in like multi-Windows, et cetera, modes, right? The agents are going to be what we're going to be getting, and agents are going to be written. Who's going to make them are going to be software developers and teams are going to say, hey, we really want to create the most complex, the smartest wedding planning agent in the world. Like, that's all we're going to do. We're the wedding planning agent. You download it onto your cell phone and you say, I have a wedding in May 15th next year, figure it out. Mm-hmm. And it just says, fine, thanks. And it will just go figure it all out. And it doesn't mean that it never talks to you. Everyone knows ChatGPT can talk to you. So I think that's kind of like the big deal. Now, if you're a wedding planner, you should be like, hey, that's what I do.
Well, the crazy thing to me is you said that the people who are making them are engineers, software developers, but I actually think that's really just a short-term phenomenon. The crazy thing to me is that not only will we have these agents that will be very powerful, but I think even they will be able to be created by anyone with really just natural language prompts. I don't think we're anywhere near that, but that is certainly where I think we're.
Yeah, I think the other, like, before we get into some more details for the listeners about what kind of specific use cases, maybe how these use cases are manifesting in real life presently and evaluated. The last thing I'll say in a very general sense is that I believe that the end goal for most of these agents is to just have very general capabilities in a way that maybe AI, at least when it was being developed pre-ChatGPT, didn't feel like it had. And by that I mean, when I was developing and doing sort of AI research, it felt very much like I was within a certain bound, maybe within a certain domain bound or within a certain problem space bound. And you can see that with, machine learning that was used for drug discovery, or maybe machine learning that was used for some kind of like detection from X-ray scans or what have you. Like, these are all very well-bounded, well fleshed out problem spaces. And I believe that the dream for agents is to actually just have this very general capability. And that, to me, was kind of the magic with ChatGPT from the perspective of someone who had been doing AI research, was it was magic that ChatGPT would really be receptive to anything, right? Like, you could really prompt it to do a whole host of things, and that was just really the magic of it. And I think AI agents are going to go along the same vein of trying to maybe right now they're being trained for certain domains, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, like gaming being one of the big domains. And then there are also some like web-based environments that AIs are being trained on right now, like e-commerce. But, as you were saying, and imagining these very like grand use cases down the line, like you'll probably end up with an agent that has just this general thinking and general reasoning capability.
Yeah, and I think we're this is let's debate this a little bit. So I do think that the agents will have will be general, right, in a sense, in mostly inheriting that general from an LLM, right? Like and where the debate I want to have is workflows. Like agents are going to want to work in workflows. Like I have this task, like, you know what I mean? And I think, I use the wedding planning, but it could be like, you could just use anything. Like I want to get this done. Do you think that it's more like the agent that you're going to be talking to is like very specialized? It has a specialized workflow, it has specialized tools, but it also at the same time has general intelligence as a result of the LM. Is that what you mean by general?
Yeah, I think that's maybe I should have made that like clearer, and to sort of go back to maybe my initial point of I think how people behave and how people in the workforce, for example, behave as maybe the inspiration for what these agents are, people developing these agents are trying to achieve, is that when we think of like any job description, the job description doesn't list certain general capabilities, but it is pretty widely assumed in most jobs that you'll be able to like write an email, like in a professional workplace, like that you'll write an email, and then with the internet there are certain like computer proficiencies, like word processing is like not necessarily listed explicitly as a job requirement. It used to be, exactly. And now it's just like a general thing. And I think that's what I meant by general, was like maybe the assumed capabilities that these agents will have. And then much like how we all have our own, job titles and our own industries, we are making those decisions to go into like the engineering field, the medical field, the nonprofit sector. And that's where you get like the specificity with agents. Like maybe you decided you were going to go into the event planning business with this agent, but there are certain like very basic capabilities. Like you might assume this agent is able to, have the tooling to send an email, have the tooling to follow up with a caterer via phone call or whatnot.
My instinct is that at least in the short term, it probably will be a mixture of many different agents, because to build any sort of agent is just incredibly difficult. And there are so many guardrails that you've got to put in place, because I really think like what these agentic workflows really imply is that you're taking yourself further and further out of the loop, right?
Right, yeah.
And that means that you have to have an enormous amount of trust in what it's doing, right? It's like kind of like the Hippocratic Oath: first do no harm, right? Like if I have an agent that's going to go out and it's got access to, being able to do things like make payments, you don't want it to just drain the entire bank. You know what I mean? Like there's just so many ways that this can go very, very wrong. And therefore I think almost necessarily the first instances of these agents, the successful ones, will in all likelihood be very purpose built for very specific workflows or industries. Right. There's also an argument that the big, large language models, the really general purpose models, just outperform on everything, right? So maybe like the more data that you've got, the more capabilities you've got, the better it will be, even at the very specific workflows. I don't know. But my hypothesis is that, the smart teams are going to really be focused on addressing very specific use cases. Devin, the code assistant that came out to much fanfare recently, only focused on coding. Right. So my sense is you're going to see a lot of very purpose-built agents just like this, because you really have to get a lot of things very right, particularly when it comes to risk and safety. And that's a really tough problem.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there. Like I maybe I think that Shane, you had said that like maybe people are going to make their own agents, and I think you're mostly right. I think at the very beginning, I feel like we're using a piece of software that's written by a team of engineers very deterministically. They've calculated all the fail states. If something goes wrong, it will solve it, and you won't find out about it. When you're pulling out the deterministic engine of it and you're swapping into the LLM, like your programming has to be like ready for all these like random stuff that the LLM is going to pull out. So like it inherently makes it like harder to write agent software because you're like, why isn't it using that tool? And so it's harder because you're relying on an LLM, which when you type in and you get a prompt back, they have to all those responses these agents are going to be getting. So it actually, I think it does make it harder. So I think the more you fine tune the workflow, you can really tune your prompts and your responses and how you and allow the LLM to respond, because like
there's also
the
just
LLM,
fewer
agent,
points of failure that you've got to test for, right?
Yeah, well,
Like
and I think that's where you either want to just ignore it, like it doesn't fail, like it just needs to do reflection. It's like that's not working. Go to another like that's where I think reflection from a LLM needs to happen. But when I was writing a early LangChain agent, we couldn't get it to like use the tools we wanted. We couldn't even figure like we were like why like. But it was clearly our prompt was off. There's so many things that were off. But I feel like that's all going to get solved. Like I think that's like how developers and maybe new developers that are trying to develop an AI, they'll figure out how to do that.
One of the things that's also reminded you mentioned at the beginning when you were given an overview of what these agents really do. I actually don't think they necessarily have to be multimodal for this very reason, right? If it's a very purpose-built workflow that's entirely reliant on reading text or producing text, I don't think it necessarily, I think it's greatly enhanced by being able to see and hear the world, but I don't necessarily think it's a hard requirement.
No, it's not. It's not, and in fact, you may find that to be like more work. As a creator of an agent might just be like, look, we don't need that. We're just trying to get our arms around making it, like do something really basic. But it's there. Like if you wanted to say, like it was great before you joined, Shane. I had a chance to talk to Francesca about it, and she had brought up Pinterest boards, which I thought was really interesting because my daughters have a bunch of Pinterest boards and they show them to me, right? But it's like what's really interesting is like with an agent, you could be like, I want to get my daughter's birthday gift. You know what I mean? Like read her Pinterest board if she gives me permission, and like find gifts on Amazon that reach that are $600 or less. You know what I mean? Or $300 or less. Stack rank them. Tell me which ones can get here. Because I'm doing this late. And then make the purchase. Like that would be a really cool agent where it's like last minute gifts. You know what I mean? But
well, this is where I think memory is actually so important, right? Because your tastes change over time as well, right? And the ability for an agent that knows your preferences and knows how those preferences are changing over time, that just creates a type of intimacy, for lack of a better word, and knowledge of who you are and what you want, that again is just not present now, but you can see why it would be so valuable.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think when going back to the definition of agents, I really do, since I come from the background of writing programs, it's like, it feels like we're writing a program. It needs to have memory. It needs to have reflection. It needs to have executional capabilities, and it needs output, right? And so, it needs to be able to talk to any API that it has access to. So I think those are all available.
Yeah.
I think, do we want to talk about some use cases? I mean, because people might be like going like, okay, I think I might understand what an agent is. Maybe I don't. Let's say I don't know. Maybe they'll learn by like, what's a good use case? I mean, like of an agent, like operating in the wild, like what would that be? Would that be helpful, you think, right around now, guys?
Yeah, I was going to say that what I enjoy about sort of the musings of just agentic AI in general. And I told Anthony this earlier, is that uh, when you're trying to kind of explain interacting with ChatGPT to someone, in my experience, it's very much like if they use it or if they've seen someone use it, they get it right away. Where, if you are already using it or have seen someone use it and you tell them like, hey, ChatGPT can be used as a brainstorming partner for your next ad campaign. It's like they get it right away. That's very accessible to them. But if they've never used it, never even seen the interface, and you're trying to explain sort of the use case for ChatGPT, which is the case for like my parents don't use ChatGPT. I don't know that they ever will. And when we were sort of trying to explain the use cases to them, it was very much like, why would I want to switch over to this? I like already write my own emails. I don't need to like get something to write my emails for me or draft my emails for me or whatnot. And what's really exciting about just the prospect of agentic AI to me is that now that you can extrapolate further from just these like very task-based use cases, like writing a job description, like brainstorming an ad campaign, writing a certain like snippet of code, or like what kind of library exists out there to help me do this thing that I want. Like you can like extrapolate further back to these broader objectives, these like high level applications. Like, I mean, Shane and Anthony, you've already named quite a number. I mean, buying like last minute gifts, planning a wedding, like these are really exciting because these are also use cases that are just everyday life, social, cultural things. And it's just
talk about the cognitive, talk about so you were talking about earlier, like the agent's going to be able to you're going to be able to shift your cognitive load to an agent, and you're still going to check in with it. Like, I think riff on that, because I think that's what's happening is like, you do it, agent, and check in with me.
I think so. I was kind of laughing earlier. So a little bit unrelated before I go into that. I was laughing a bit earlier, just because for people who have listened to all our episodes, I was reminded of something we recorded maybe 2+ months back, where we were talking about the single person unicorn. Will a single entrepreneur have a $1 billion company? We were also talking about benchmarks and sort of benchmarks that are not technical benchmarks, but maybe workplace benchmarks. And we think about this idea of cognitive load. And I think a lot of what we were saying, why it might be possible for a single person to actually come up with a unicorn all by, themselves, is that these AI tools allow, they take care of the busy work and they allow you to do the thinking, right? And that's kind of what cognitive load is. The argument for using these AI tools in the workplace is because maybe something scheduling weekly meetings, maybe sending out sort of very standard boilerplate emails, writing job descriptions, that isn't where you want to be putting your cognitive load at the workplace. And you want to save this cognitive load for the other things that you actually want to be thinking about, maybe bigger brand strategy, maybe actually looking at your organization and thinking, okay, what kind of hires should we make? So to go back to your question, Anthony, with AI agents, it's not only a larger cognitive load that you might be able to offload to an AI agent, it's also in a way a higher stakes load. And I think that's just really interesting because it feels like an inflection point, or a point of tension, because at some point, as Shane was saying earlier, trust and safety, even personal ownership and responsibility of the individual comes into question where it didn't before. And that's why I was thinking okay, it's kind of funny how things have changed since we recorded that like a couple
Yeah, totally.
couple
Yeah.
of months ago, right? Where we were very much like, okay, this handoff would be great if, you know, this LLM could just like write all my emails. And now I'm like, oh, the cognitive load of like hiring someone, like how much of that do I want to let go of? And so I really liked an example that Anthony, you mentioned to me offline, was like, you might give your AI agent the objective of like, you want to narrow down candidates for a new kind of like marketing manager, and you are handing the agent like a bunch of resumes, some tooling like the job description, all of that, and just going like, hey, give me the best candidates along this job description, and I want to see a short list of like 10 people. And you might optimize for certain things like regional availability, diversity, like number of years in the industry, but that's pretty much it. And then the agent would kind of go through its autonomous workflow to do that kind of processing.
And you know, in its if it reached its full potential, right?
Right.
It's capable of even so much more than just that, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
can tell one of these agents, I want to hire this particular type of person for this role by this time. Here's a budget that you can go out and use to post on all these different job boards. You tell me which job boards you want to post on, manage the listing, write the job description, and then send me all the candidates, right? Like, so you can go, you know, quite far down the path of the workflow.
Yeah.
You know, if you're really thinking about, you know, these, you know, this software and its full potential.
Yeah.
Like for me personally, the use case that I'm excited about, like I want a tireless executive assistant that will do all of that planning, right? Like my wife gets so frustrated at me because I'm just not, like, when it comes to planning out the trips and like, you know, doing all these different things, like the administrative work, just like I'm planning so much with our company and our business that anything outside of that I could not be bothered to do, which I know drives her crazy. If I had an agent to do all of that administrative work for me, it's not just eliminating the time spent, it's eliminating an enormous amount of just stress having to deal with it, because it's not fun work. You know, like I don't want to go compare airline flights and then find a hotel. Like that type of work, I know some people actually enjoy. I really couldn't be bothered to do it. I just don't want, I mean, to me, like it's little productivity things like that would be just huge for me.
Yeah, I think.
And so if I could quickly jump in, that is exactly like the like perfect example of cognitive load, the way I think about it, because I think planning a trip, like my argument is that when you are planning a trip or planning a party, planning a wedding, even planning like a birthday gift, like the cognitive load, at least for me, is not really in the execution of any of those like things. Like the cognitive load like falls on the individual who has to like make the decisions, right? And so if I think about planning a trip, like let's say, you know, the three of us are planning a trip. We don't even live like in the same area. So there's already like some cognitive load of trying to optimize for a destination. We all have different interests. We all have different sort of patterns of behavior. Like maybe someone's a night owl, someone's an early bird, someone is like, you know, really likes to take afternoon naps. Maybe someone likes the city. Maybe someone likes the beach. We all have different price points. Maybe someone wants to bring their partner, their kids, whatnot. Like the cognitive load to me is figuring that out. But there isn't that much cognitive load necessarily in the like booking the hotel once that decision has been made, like booking the flight, you know, scheduling some kind of like, I don't know, your Uber to the airport, all of that stuff. Like that is the stuff that I personally would want to hand off to the like existing AI tools now. And the prospect of maybe handing off some of what I feel like is the cognitive load for myself to an agent is like what's really enticing, right? That there are just so many different factors to consider that you can maybe tell an agent like, hey, can we optimize for a location that can accommodate like 12 people and has some opportunities to be in the city and to be outdoors.
Yeah.
Like,
But here's
that's
the
really,
tricky thing
yeah.
to
Yep.
me, right? It's making sure you're not offloading the things that you do want to be doing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Well, I
so
enjoy trip planning, so
yeah,
yeah.
well, and that's why, like, I mean, I love looking at pictures of amazing hotels and
Right.
some exotic location, and being able to look through the pictures and have some, like, exercise my judgment, right? Like, you don't want to hand over the entire process, and that gets at one of the other elements, which I think is actually really important to agents, which is just the user experience in general, right? And I almost think about it in terms of, how do you get the agent to prompt you, right? Not you prompting it, but how do you get it to prompt you for feedback, right? To ask, like, hey, am I on the right track, right? Or, hey, here's where you need to check in. Here's where you need
I
to
mean,
give me feedback, because that feedback is ultimately what is going into its memory. It's informing how it iterates and improves over time. And without that mechanism built in, I don't think it's going to be a good experience, right? So, and that's a really tricky balance to strike. And there are some tools we can talk about that I think are doing this effectively. But I think that notion of just having a two-way dialogue, even though you're really delegating as much of it as possible, is pretty critical.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The prospect of being asked a question back, like a logical question back, is something that we don't really experience now, and I think is a very like intriguing prospect of like how it might change the way we just interact with AI and technology as a whole.
yeah, I think you guys hit on so many cool things, and um, you know, for me, I think that the work related AIs that I could see emerging in our lives could show up as like like you just join a company and there's a Slack person in there that just is called Bobby. It's like, and Bobby greets you and says, "Hey, I could get you anything at the company you require to kind of make sure your computers and accoutrements are there." You don't know if that's an AI or not, right? But ideally, like if you want to run a lean company and you want to do it smart, it's like, yeah, Bobby, you just say, yeah, I need a new mouse. Boom, it just shows up. Do you like these three? Yes, I like the third one. Great. But that could be a total AI, right? It's essentially controlled by the company. It can interface with everybody, but you can see how that it can expand. It's like, hey, I know Shane and Francesca, I know you guys need to be in New York in September for our event. Can you guys fly out of Oakland and San Francisco or San Francisco? San Francisco, got it. You can just see how the interface it's prompting you. It already knows the mission. It's in your calendar. It was like, you're going to New York. You're required to be here. It just starts prompting you, and then you could actually tell it, hey, blacklist, I never want to stay at the Ace Hotel. Blacklist that. Whitelist these 5 hotels. Great. We all know how to write code to whitelist and blacklist stuff. We don't need to have an LLM do that. You could do a mixture of code where it's like, you think at LLM, you do this. Also, these are the tools, whitelist, blacklists, but it could just start doing that. And I feel like having that in a Slack interface or like an interface like that, where you're already working with colleagues that way, right? Now you have a new colleague who's doing work for you where you've pushed the cognitive load off, but when it comes into when it doesn't know how to make the right decision for you, it just asks you. And that's how normal work works. Like it just happens that way. Right now, you open up a ChatGPT client, you're not going to get that kind of response. You have to drive it. It's really, that's why I keep saying it's like, I think we're at the dumbest state of AI, meaning the interface is quite, I don't want to sound crude, but dumb. It's just, you actually have to sit there and be present with it. Whereas what we want to do is just say, I need to be in New York. I need to be there with Shane and Francesca. It's in September. You have the dates. Figure out a plan to get us all there. And if you get stuck, ask us.
Yeah, and I could see where to use your example, you get to a company, or maybe you're not even at a company, but you've got an entire army of these things, right? I was listening to an interview with Eric Schmidt recently, and he used a couple of phrases that I actually thought were really eye-opening. One of which was, he said, we're going to see an explosion of digital power on a per-person basis, which is going to create an abundance of action, right? And what he means by that is eventually we will, I think there's no question about it, have access to these agents, and more likely than not have access to multiple agents, all executing various workflows and tasks for us all the time, 24/7. The thing is, like, do you really want to manage 100 or 1,000 or even like 3 different agents, right? So I view, probably more likely where we're heading is maybe behind the scenes, you've got that army, but you've got essentially your own little chief of staff who's running the show, right? And is delegating. Because if you think about, like, even what we currently have today, right? Like, you pull up your smartphone and you've got, if you're like me, you've got tons of apps on the phone, and it's not, all that difficult to manage them. But I think there's a better experience than having to go into each individual program to do what you want, right?
Yeah.
That's what, the Rabbit R1 device was promising. I don't think that company is going to survive at all.
No.
But you can see that's the direction that they're going with it, right? Like, we don't want you to have to interact with the apps. And I think similarly, people are not going to want to have to interact with all these different assistants. People just generally don't want the overhead, the mental overhead that's involved in having to delegate.
And I think this speaks to sort of the broader state of AI, at least how I see it, and maybe you two agree with me. But I think right now, I'm one of those people where I open a bunch of tabs and it drives me crazy. And there is no better feeling I have than when I finish something and can just like close all my tabs. I really am just always opening more and more tabs, resource docs, reference docs, anything I need, my own like note taking document. And then when I'm done with something like that I'm working on, like some feature, whatever, I feel that, overwhelming sense of relief to close all the tabs.
I'll tell you what agent I want. I want an agent that can find the tab that my Google Meet is on so I can actually get back to the video. Because I lose it all the time.
And so I think this really is what AI might be in the future, is this idea of AI in the background. Now that we are reaching like unprecedented levels of like complexity and competency within these like large language models, like right now it still feels very, very unnatural to me to have to like open a new tab and get to like ChatGPT, right? Like that is, and then I have to like go back to my original thing that I was using it for, and then go back and forth. And and I know there are like attempts in the UI of ChatGPT to like have your conversations like kind of bound within each other, which is very nice, because then that makes it easy for me to find them again. But that's still like a very unnatural kind of workflow, to the point where sometimes if it is a task, even a mundane one, but that I know I can bang out quicker than it would take me to do all of that opening, prompting, copying, and pasting, and then sending, like I'll do it myself. And I think like AI agents, like there is this huge opportunity to just change the delivery of AI to consumer, which is that, and we talk about this with Gemini in one of our other podcasts, right? Like that we feel like where Gemini could really, really succeed is if it gets integrated or folded in to all the existing like Google workflows. Like if Gemini is like running the Google show as we are using Gmail, as we are using Google Workspace, as we're using all of search, all of that. And the same with Copilot for Microsoft, etc. And to your point, Shane, like maybe we don't want to have to think about managing like hundreds or thousands of agents, but I can imagine an AI agent pretty much working behind the scenes of like everything I am currently touching and actually using. And that could really streamline my problem of having too many tabs and too many windows and too many apps and just like all this clutter. If this like really, really efficient, autonomous AI can work in the background of these things and reduce that amount of clutter for me
Yeah.
and like
And
make
you can
my
see
process less, I don't
yeah.
know,
Well, you mentioned
difficult.
ChatGPT. They're clearly trying to go in this direction. I mean, very
Right.
explicitly going in this direction. That I think is what the intent of the custom GPTs really was.
Yeah.
So what was really missing in those for me, as helpful as I actually have seen some of them be, is this ability to take action, right? Like to be able to like hook an API up to ChatGPT where it's like, okay, you're trained on this body of knowledge or this corpus of questions and answers, so you know all the time what I want. I don't have to keep coming back and entering the same prompt over and over again. But I want you to be able to take that next step and be able to go to, a travel website and actually make, the booking. Or I want you to go to, some other website and process a payment or do something else. Like it's just not there yet, And I know, Google's obviously working on something similar with their Vertex initiative. And they had a video recently where they were talking about the capabilities and all the models they were hosting, which all sounds cool, but the examples just seemed a little lackluster to me. They
Yeah.
seem much more like customer service agents, in the agent sense of the word, but not really, true agents like what we're talking about. But all these big tech companies, they're all working on, fulfilling some vision or some version of what we are talking about. I'm not sure if they're going to be the ones to do it first, or it's going to be some small upstart,
Yeah.
that's
Anthony, I
just
think
really
you're on
laser focused on one specific workflow.
Yeah, I actually think that it's the latter, right? I feel like the Googles of the world, the Amazons, they're building hyperscalers, they're building frameworks, they're pulling all the models in one place. They want to get your cloud dollars to flow through them. And Google really hasn't solved a small problem for a long time, right? They need to solve big problems. So I believe that the AI agents or the agentic flows that we're going to use and enjoy will come from small teams all running inside of one of those big networks, right? Because the models are there, the compute's there, and all that kind of stuff there. My other belief, and I could be wrong, is that much like how some of the best software ever written in the world, which I go back to like Unix operating systems, each program was a very small thing that it did, and it did it really well. Move files, copy files, list files. They're very small little programs. A cron job. All these like little tiny, like the Unix operating system just got added little tiny features that made it a very stable operating and durable operating environment, which we all use today, whether we use it remotely or very actively. I think AI agents are going to follow that same thing. Someone's going to say, hey, I want to tackle wedding planning, or I want to tackle a chief of staff product, which actually is a harder one because it has to interface with so many things.
Mm-hmm.
But you could really just see, like, I just want to do this really, really well. And it's going to plug probably into something that does chat to you. Like for me, agents, I think sadly are sort of like what really disrupts the labor market. It's not the chat. It's not ChatGPT is not going to take my job.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, oh, wow, this company came up with like the social media manager AI agent. What does it do? Well, it does a lot. It reads every post in the world constantly. It knows how to respond. It knows how to. That's going to go like boom. Social media managers are now they cost too much money compared to having an agent. I think. Go ahead.
And so how do you adapt to that, right? Like for our audience, like say you are a social media manager, like and these agents are coming for these very specific tasks like social media management. It can, like, let's say it has the tools to engage with posts. It has the access to really evaluate the performance maybe of your Instagram post. It has that kind of like how many likes, how many views, all that good stuff. It can maybe generate some content as well and post on some regular schedule. Like, so if you're a social media manager listening right now, like what is your recommendation?
My recommendation is like, it's not going to happen like in like,
it's not going to happen tomorrow.
It's not going to happen in 15 months, but
Yeah.
but in 36
that said,
months,
we are already seeing direct impact on jobs because of these AI tools. And we talked about this notion of compression, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Shane, I think it's a great question, and I think that what we're all trying to do here, the three of us, outside of just sort of talking about this stuff, and having everyone listen along and ask us questions, I think our whole alarm bell is to say, hey, you as a social media manager or fill in the blank, HR executive or even a software developer, I would say, think of this more like the warning is like, you have high cholesterol, you got to change your life, like or you're gonna have a heart attack and die. I really think it's like that. I really think that these agents, all of this really cool technology is going to come to bear, and it's going to affect your job. And the way we think that the best solution to take is to take it seriously and really become active in understanding how all this software is working now and where it's going, and become the expert in it, so that in the event that it does arrive as a tool that you're like, this does a lot of really good stuff that I do on the daily, but I'm going to operate it. I'm not going to get replaced by it. If you wait and do nothing and it arrives as a tool that could do your job, your leverage on it is very low. And so we're talking about becoming become AI literate, know the tools, really do the research. No one's going to do it for you. I think if you're waiting, you're going to come to a place where it's going to be bad. And I'll give an example, and then I'll pass it over to Shane. Early on, when I was building web software, we always said, hey, wow, this is going to it's going to really make a travel agent's job bad. For some people that are not as old as me, travel agents used to have offices, like retail stores you would walk into and sit down, and they would do all this amazing work for you. It was quite amazing. And that's gone. Like, you book your own train travel, you book your own hotel, like you do it. Like you couldn't imagine. There's like that was a really web software put agents out. Craigslist took down newspaper classified ad business. There's just numerous things that just disappeared. So to your question, Francesca, if you're a marketing media manager or you're an HR executive, you need to really find out all the software. We categorize it all. You need to learn all that software, and you need to watch where it's going, so that you are the decider or the operator, because it's never going to go fully autonomous. Someone's going to be in charge of social media at the company, but you might not need 5 managers.
Yeah,
if you're one of those managers,
and this applies to literally every job in every industry. And I
Correct.
think research can give a very passive connotation. I think you've got to do more than just read. I think you've got to get in and start using a lot of these new tools. And one of the things I think that is very true is that so many people, when they think of AI, they just think ChatGPT, right? But the reality is the industry is so much bigger, and it goes so much further than just ChatGPT. There are literally thousands and thousands of new tools out there. And I feel like we say this on every podcast, but you've got to be experimenting with the ones that are relevant to your job. Because the ones who are, they're just going to have a massive advantage over you if they know how to use this new breed of technology and you don't. I think ChatGPT is a good gateway drug because it gets you accustomed to this new behavior that I think is required to interact with this new class of technology. But there are so many more purpose-built tools. Now, I actually have a much more optimistic view over the long term, though.
Yeah,
because
me too.
you brought up travel agents, for example. But if you look at our employment rates today, they're pretty high. right? So people, I think, inevitably tend to settle into new jobs. They're a new set of skills. That's not to say that during a transition period that some people are just going to get left behind. And I hate that. But the way to make sure you are not the one getting left behind is to go out and actively experiment. And I think part of that is also, if you're an employer, you have to create a culture that rewards this type of experimentation, because a lot of people are still afraid to even admit that they're using new AI tools at their jobs for fear of reprisal, right? But I do think over the long term, just because we're able to do a lot more with less doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to just fire everybody, because historically the trend has been quite the opposite. We get these new tools like email, for example. Are any of us working any less? No. In fact, we're being asked to do more, right? So I think the same thing's going to happen.
Yeah,
with
like
AI.
as productivity goes up, employment goes up. I do think that Francesca, I'll let you go, but I'll just finish that thought. I do think that you're going to have new jobs, but and we may get net new jobs, and we may not. But I do think that companies are going to, like, capitalism really wins on efficiencies, right? So as efficiencies kind of happen, it's like, hey, can you do more with less? Like, I am doing more, right? But like my company, like if any big company I worked for, they weren't like, hey, you're doing so much more. Can we pay you more? Can we hire more people? They're like, good. Like, how do you do more? Like, it's top grade your team. It was like optimize, optimize, optimize. It's never like, so I feel like, efficiency is rewarded in capital markets. And I think we're all living in capital markets. And so I do think there's a compression on jobs, and so we might get fewer people, but we'll maybe get more diamonds as pressure kind of pushes down. But I do think that we're going to realize you could probably do more. You could probably run an organization with fewer bodies. And I think we're seeing that.
I kind of think that's a good thing anyway, though. I mean, like, so many
that might
people,
be.
so many people
Not if
hate,
you're losing your job, though. That's
no,
a bad thing.
the way I see it is, like, so many people hate their jobs.
Yeah.
So many people absolutely despise their jobs, right? And I think one of the promises of AI, not to be overly Pollyannish about it, is that it will enable the rise of, really the solopreneur and more entrepreneurs. Because if you do have this, army of agents, or, maybe one agent that's managing a bunch of others, like, why wouldn't you go into business for yourself if you now have access to an extremely cheap and, tireless workforce? Always on and always at the ready.
Yeah, many podcasts ago, in the most inspired way, Francesca said that exact same thing. And I think that's the optimism. And I think, Francesca, do you remember talking about that? You're saying maybe there'll be like 1,000 like entrepreneurs or new businesses blooming. And I thought that was a great sort of like, as AI agents explode, you might be able to like cobble a bunch of them together and run a really big business. And it's just maybe 3 of you.
I mean, wouldn't you rather have that than, answer to somebody else every day and work towards somebody else's vision? I think that really is a very achievable future.
Yeah, well, I want to, just to go back to the sort of like original question. I want to like reiterate what I believe you said, Anthony, or maybe it was you, Shane, which is that as much as we are envisioning this kind of rise of autonomous AI, I do agree that there will not be a point, for various reasons, and we didn't cover like trust and safety at all, or responsibility, which I think is a huge question specifically for AI agents, and probably is why I believe right now that there will not come a point where it will be completely human-less. Like, there was always going to be some human in the loop, whether that is like a workforce of 100 people at a company or one person at a company. But there will be like a human kind of responsible, for better or for worse, and for lack of a better word, like for the AI agent or the like multiple AI agents. And so for me, in terms of just like what as we look towards the development of AI agents in specific industries and with specific applications like social media, it's sort of like training yourself to look at what the opportunities there like exist for you. And so I'll give like two examples. When I think of like a social media manager, like you come in with the advantage of having this very specific domain knowledge of social media management, assuming that that is your current role. And so as these agents are, being developed, like no agent is going to be introduced perfectly the first time. Like there is going to be some like R&D with sort of maybe the integration of like the first agent maybe integrates with Instagram, but not with LinkedIn, not with Snapchat, not with, TikTok, all those things. And it's sort of like you identifying the opportunities for you to become useful. You may become useful because maybe to your company that is developing this in-house social media agent, you're like, hey, you are missing this very specific feature on this agent that I, as a social media manager, do like for hours a day, and you haven't done that. So that could be like one point of usefulness, is that you come in with this domain knowledge and you are staying up to date with the tools, as Shane and Anthony said, and you would realize, hey, none of these social media managers are like given the ability to respond to comments on a post. And that is like something that is key to engagement. Or maybe these social media managers aren't optimizing for this kind of audience. And you go in and that is sort of your value add to this like recognition of the opportunities for you out there. So that's my first additional kind of point. My second one, which I think is something that we've spoken about in previous podcasts and that we definitely speak about internally all the time, is that as certain skills become really easy to, kind of compensate for, like coding, the fact that maybe you don't necessarily need to learn fluency in a certain language because you could prompt an LLM to sort of code up some capability in Python or whatever programming language. We've really been thinking of then what kinds of skills become most valuable. And the like very, in my opinion, lovely irony in all of this technological advancement is like what becomes extremely valuable is this interpersonal connection, this like ability to personally connect. And when we were looking at this topic of agentic AI, there's this like very, very widely circulated talk that Andrew Ng did about agentic AI. I thought was very compelling, super easy to understand, and really kind of easy to buy into. But that's because it was, Andrew Ng speaking. It wasn't like an AI agent telling me as a human and understanding me as a human what I would maybe need to hear. And then also maybe going as personalized as, kind of tailored for a technical audience, kind of tailored to people who are maybe more optimistic about the space. Like this idea of interpersonal connection is going to become so valuable in the face of technological advancement. One thing that I always think is so interesting when I scroll on my LinkedIn and through my feed is like there are a ton of AI influencers now, on YouTube, like a ton of people doing these tutorials of like how to prompt better for this in ChatGPT, or like what tools could you integrate to make your emailing workflow more efficient. Like, but these are all people telling me how to do these things. These are all like AI influencers, like posting blogs, doing short Instagram reels, what have you. And those people, like, that was not a title that existed like 3 years ago, an AI influencer.
I mean,
and
influencer period didn't
right,
exist.
yeah. And so it's like the idea of this interpersonal connection kind of being the gold mine, and maybe specifically for a social media marketing manager, because that is what you're kind of capitalizing on, until it gets to the point that maybe your product is just bought by AI agents. Like maybe it becomes this thing where we've given too much autonomy to AI agents and they're making all of our purchases and like decisions for us. But until then, I think the interpersonal connection is sort of like
Totally
the
agree with
going to
that.
be the kind of key differentiating quality amidst
Right.
all of this technological innovation.
I totally agree. One other thing that another piece of irony that I think of here is, which is relevant to this conversation around what skills will there really be a premium on in the future. I don't think the importance of software engineering is ever going to go away. But when
Right.
you think about, the promise of agents, what you're really kind of talking about at a conceptual level is being able to, go higher and higher up in terms of like the abstraction level, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking of things at a higher and higher level. It's more higher order thinking and planning and
Yeah.
directing and delegating. Um, so in some ways you're getting further and further away from the software, so to speak, right? But in
Right.
other ways, I think one of the promises that, these agentic workflows offer is a closer connection between you as a non-technical person and the software itself, right? Where you are
Mm.
having more and more direct control over not just the writing, but the rewriting of the software over and over again as it iterates and it's learning more about who you are. And to me, again, it goes back to just this idea of how important, the user experience is with these agents, right? How do you make sure that you are prompting the human at the right time and the right frequency to give the feedback that it needs to keep doing the job well? Because as we've talked about, the dangers and the risks are actually really high. The more control we turn over to these things and the further out of the loop we are, I think the more opportunities for things to go really, really wrong, which obviously we don't want that version of this agentic future.
No, we don't. But we will probably witness it, and it will get
There's going to
fixed.
be mistakes for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I mean, they're in the, but it's exciting, and I really liked both your guys' sort of, I guess, ending thoughts here about, like, the personalities that are coming out on YouTube talking about AI that's brand new, and some of those people are brand new to AI, by the way.
Yeah.
They're not like scholars. They're like,
Yeah.
this is so
It's like
cool.
why is that more compelling than maybe reading a handbook, an AI generated handbook? Like it's the person, right? It's kind of
It's
maybe why people choose to listen to us today, right? Like
right.
there's just something about that, like, ability to connect with other people on, for in our case, like this topic of AI and technological innovation and how that is sort of affecting people, and people are still really at the core of this
Yeah.
experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the values of our whole business is, like, it's like we love AI, but we love people more. You know what I mean? And so this, we're all about trying to, like, keep that connection and say, that's the cherished part of being a human, is that we can have those times with each other, and get inspired by each other. So I think, let some AI agents take on some cognitive load. Let's always have the human in the loop. Those are some things we talked about. I think that this podcast, as we sort of wrap it up, we are hopefully inspiring you to think, like, look into AI agents or agentic workflows. They are sort of the next thing coming in the
Yeah.
world of AI. That's like, great, you could chat, but now these things can do real work for you,
Right.
and real work for you is wide open. And we'll stay on this topic. We think that the companies that we're tracking in our database are emerging as, a lot of them are emerging as agents, and they're doing really core work for different kinds of businesses and use cases. So check in with us. I that's all I got right now. Francesca, Shane, you guys got any parting words or anything to say? Say it, and let's wrap this pod up.
Well, I guess, how can they find us, and what can they expect from us as we help them and also help ourselves navigate through this kind of AI this ocean of stuff
Yeah.
to
So
deal with.
so I'll go, and then I'll let Shane go. Because, like, we have it. Our URL is we have two URLs right now, but we'll just say the only one. We'll say you can point your web browser at getcoai.com, and
There's
that will,
getcoai.com.
yep. we're there. We're writing. We're sort of, there's a, we're covering the AI space, but we're trying to do it in a slower fashion, so you're not getting overwhelmed. But we are going deep. We have collected of a lot of data, which I'll let Shane talk about. We are definitely doing. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Apple and Spotify, and we would like to get you guys in telling us what you'd like about what we're doing via comments in either Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. But Shane, why don't you talk about some of the data that we've collected, and then we can sign off.
Yeah, I would just say you can all. I mean, it's the same name on all the social media channels. Get CoAI, but as we said before, the world of AI is just so much bigger and broader than just ChatGPT. And if you are looking for a place to find a lot of those more purpose-built tools, definitely come to the website. We've organized an enormous number of leaderboards, which really we think surface the top players worth paying attention to, really in any given category that you can think of. Beyond that, we're going to start to host some interactive workshops where we start to teach people how to use some of these tools, beginning with ChatGPT. There are a ton of those classes out there, but we think ours really is differentiated. We'll teach you really a starting point to learn how to make that behavioral shift that we talked about. That's required to use a lot of these tools, because if you know how to use one of them, you can begin to understand how to leverage, so many other different, again, more purpose-built tools. So check out the site. And we'd love to hear from you. If you've got questions, if you want help working through a particular workflow or ideating on, how you can incorporate a particular tool or teach your team, reach out to us. We'd love to talk.
Yep. That's it. We're done. It's happy Friday, everybody.
Yeah. See you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks, Francesca. See you, Shane.
See you guys.
Good job.